Okay guys, today we're going to talk about how to subtract integers, and we're going to use a rule or two. I'll give you two. You can use whichever one works best for you. Our first rule for subtracting integers is going to be to add the opposite. So we are going to add the opposite number. Or, and this doesn't really fit here, so we're just going to write it out. We could also say add a line and change the sign. So add the opposite, sorry, hit my video camera. Okay, so add the opposite or add a line and change the sign, whatever you can remember. Add the opposite or add a line and change the sign. You'll see in a minute. They both mean the same thing. It's just whichever one you can remember. So let's go here and look at our examples. All right. Example 1, we're going to go straight down all the way through E. Goes boom, 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 boom. And then we'll move over to example 2's column and example 3. So example 1, 5 minus negative 8. Well, add the opposite or add a line, change the sign. So I think for example 1, I'm going to use the phrase add the opposite. For example 2, I'm going to use the add a line, change the sign. I'm going to use that wording on that one. And for example 3, I'll just do either or. Okay? So if I'm using the phrase add the opposite, well, I've got 5, and then I want to add, so I'm going to change that to addition. And now what's the opposite of negative 8? Positive 8. Now I'm going to use my rules for addition. So if the signs are the same, they're both positive, I'm going to add the numbers and keep the sign. So 5 plus 8 is 13. And I'm going to keep the sign, they're both positive, so it's a positive 13. All right, let's look at B. So I've got negative 12, and I want to add the opposite. So what's the opposite of positive 5? Negative 5. Okay, again, when I'm adding, you got to go back to your rules for addition. So basically, as you see, our main goal for subtracting integers is to change it to an addition problem so that we can use our addition rules. All right, so I added the opposite. So now, since my signs are the same, they're both negative numbers, I'm going to add them together. 12 plus 5 is 17. And I'm going to keep the sign. So when I say that, this one's negative and that one's negative, so I'm going to keep the negative sign. Let's look at C. Negative 4. And then I want to add the opposite. So what's the opposite of positive 7? Negative 7. Now I'm going to use my rules for addition. The signs are the same. They're both negative numbers. So I'm going to add them together. And I'm going to keep the sign. They're both negative, so I'm keeping that negative sign. Let's look at D. 8. I want to add the opposite. What's the opposite of negative 8? Positive 8. Signs are the same. So I'm going to add them together. 8 plus 8 is 16. And keep the sign. They're both positive, so positive 16 is my answer. Letter E. Negative 2. And then add the opposite. What's the opposite of positive 13? Negative 13. And the reason, guys, I write the parentheses around this is so it doesn't look all like negative 2 plus minus 13. That can get really confusing. So I keep the parentheses around it to just show that that's a negative 13. So going back to this, we're going to go to our rules for addition. They have the same sign. They're both negative, so I'm going to add them together. 13 and 2 is 15, and I'm going to keep the sign. Again, both negative, so negative 15. So as you can see, what we're doing each time, adding the opposite or add a line, change the sign, okay? What we're doing each time is we're taking each subtraction problem and we're turning it into an addition problem so that you can use your rules of addition that you learned yesterday. So now let's go to example 2 and let's use the phrase add a line, change the sign. So here's 4. I'm going to add a line and then change the sign. What's the opposite of positive 7? Negative 7. So I add a line, change the sign. I'm going to rewrite that. Plus negative 7. Add a line, change the sign. Okay? Now, 4 and negative 7, those have different signs. So if you think back to your rules for addition, when the when the numbers have different signs, we take the difference. Difference means to subtract. Okay, so what's 7 minus 4? 3. Okay, and then you keep the sign of the one with the most. You could hear it said that way. Keep the sign of the one with the most. Well, there's more negative 7s than there are positive 4s, so I'm going to keep that sign. Or you may hear me say, keep the sign of the one with the largest absolute value. Remember, absolute value is how far a number is from 0. So the absolute value of 4 is 4, and the absolute value of negative 7 is 7. Well, which one has the greatest absolute value? This one. And since that's a negative, I'm going to keep the negative sign. Okay, B. 15. Add a line, change the sign. So 15 plus now negative 19. My signs are different, positive and negative. So I'm going to take the difference between the two. So what's the difference between 15 and 19? Well, 19 minus 15 is 4. And then I'm going to keep the sign of the one with the most. Well, which one has the most? Well, there's more negative 19s than there are positive 15s. There's 19 negatives and there's only 15 positives. So this one has the most. So negative 4. Or you can go with which one has the greatest absolute value. That's only 15 spaces away from 0, and that's 19 spaces away from 0. So this one has the biggest absolute value. So that's why we keep the negative sign. C, add a line, change the sign. This was negative 3, now it's positive 3. So we'll rewrite negative 8 plus positive 3. My signs are different, so I'm going to take the difference. 8 minus 3 is 5. Now, which one has the greatest absolute value? Well, that's 8 spaces from 0, and that's 3. So this one has the greatest absolute value, and it's a negative, so my answer is going to be negative. Or, which one has the most? You have more negatives than you do positives. You've got 8 negatives and only 3 positives, so this one has the most. So I'm going to keep that sign, the negative. D, add a line, change the sign. So this becomes negative 1 plus 6. My signs are different, negative and positive, so I'm going to take the difference. 6 minus 1 is 5. Okay, and which one has the greatest absolute value? That's only 1 space from 0, and that's 6 spaces. So this one has the greatest absolute value, and it's positive, so my answer is positive. Or, which one do you have the most of? I only have 1 negative, but I have 6 positives, so I have more positives, so positive. Letter E, add a line, change the sign. Okay, so now I've got 9 plus negative 17. Well, my signs are different, positive and negative, so I'm going to take the difference. 17 minus 9 is 8. Now, which one has the greatest absolute value? Well, that's 9 spaces from 0, and that's 17. So this one has the greatest absolute value, and it's a negative, so my answer is going to be negative. Or you can go and say which one has the most. Well, there's only 9 positives, and there's 17 negatives. So there's more negatives than there are positives. So your answer is negative. All right, example 3. I'm just going to flip-flop between add the opposite and add a line, change the sign. Letter A, add the opposite. So I'm going to add, and then the opposite of positive 4 is negative 4. Go back to my adding integers rules. The signs are different. That's a positive 5 and that's a negative 4. So when the signs are different, I'm going to take the difference. Difference means to subtract. So what's 5 minus 4? Well, that's 1. Which one has the greatest absolute value? That's 5 spaces from 0, and that's 4. So this one has the greatest absolute value, and it's positive, so my answer is positive. Let's look at B. Add a line, change the sign. Again, you can switch back and forth between the two, or just go with one, whatever works best for you. Add the opposite, or add a line, change the sign. Up to you. So I'm going to rewrite 12 plus negative 10. My signs are different. That's a positive and that's a negative, so I'm going to take the difference. What's 12 minus 10? Well, that's 2. Which one do you have more of? Well, you've got 12 positives and 10 negatives. I've got more positives, so my answer is positive. Let's look at C. We're going to add the opposite. What's the opposite of positive 1? Negative 1. Okay? I've got a positive and a negative. My signs are different, so I'm going to take the difference. 4 minus 1 is 3. Which one do I have more of? I have 4 positives and I only have 1 negative. I've got more positives, so my answer is positive. Let's look at D. Add a line, change the sign. So I've got 13 plus negative 5. My signs are different, positive and negative, so I'm going to take the difference. 13 minus 5 is 8. Which one do I have more of? I've got 13 positives and I've only got 5 negatives, so I've got more positives. So positive 8. Alright, and 7, I'm going to add the opposite. Opposite of positive 2 is negative 2. My signs are different, so I'm going to take the difference. That's a positive, that's a negative. So 7 minus 2 is 5. Which one has the greatest absolute value? That's 7 spaces from 0, and that's only 2. So this one has the greatest absolute value, positive 7. So my answer is positive 5. All right? So when subtracting, your goal is to change it to an addition problem so that you can use your rules of addition. All right? So you can do that by adding the opposite or add a line and change the sign. Whatever works best for you, whichever one you can remember. All right, your goal is to change it to an addition problem so that you can use the rules for addition to find your answer. Okay? Add the opposite or add a line and change the sign. All right.